Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is José Barzola. Welcome to our Mediation Professionals in the Field Talk Story series. I'm the Conflict and Peace Specialist here at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Our talk today is on supporting families in transition. It doesn't have to get ugly with our wonderful special guest, Katie Bennett. Thank you for joining us today to learn about a journey into this profession. Our event today is co-sponsored by the Conflict Resolution Alliance, the Conflict and Peace Specialists, in collaboration with Family Mediation Hawaii, the Hawaii State Judiciary Center for Alternative Dispute Resolution, the Hawaii State Bar Association, ADR Section, the Matsunaga Institute for Peace, the Community Mediation Centers on Kauai. We have the Kauai Economic Opportunity Incorporated, the mediation programs, Kokaki Mediation Center, the Maui Mediation Services, Mediation Center of the Pacific, and the West Hawaii Mediation Center. So it is really wonderful to see everyone kind of coming together for this gathering today. Thank you for joining us to learn about how conflict is stressful for everyone, but it is especially toxic for children. By supporting families to reach agreements without resorting to litigation, we create better outcomes for families as they grow and change. Our special guest today is Katie Bennett Esquire, MSW, who's the founder of Family Mediation Hawaii, a settlement-focused collaborative law firm helping families through difficult transitions. Katie and her staff help parents reach child-focused settlements agreements that allow divorcing and separating families to move forward without litigation. As a mother of three, Katie understands the toxic effect sustained parental conflict has on kids. Her background is family law, conflict resolution, social work, family systems theory, child welfare, mental health, substance abuse, intimate partner violence, and child development provide the expertise to assist families in navigating the complexities and pitfalls of co-parenting from separate households. You can definitely learn more about Family Mediation Hawaii at www.familymediationhawaii.com, and I'll be sure to put the link in the chat as well. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And to get us started, I'm going to turn it over to Katie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jose. I appreciate you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to go quick through this stuff, you guys, because I think hopefully the fun part will be the talk story with Jose. And also, if you guys have questions, I'm very open to just sort of chatting informally about it. Can everyone see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
So contact info is up here. Feel free to reach out, especially because I'm going to go pretty fast for this part. But oh, okay. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about my family. So my three kids and husband who delight and challenge me every day. And I will say that despite being a divorce professional, I've actually been married for, it'll be 19 years next month. Just so you guys are aware, I am a recovering family law attorney. Right out of the gate, I started out at legal aid, representing kids in foster care. Then once we realized how much our mortgage was going to be here in Hawaii, I started doing private practice, some adoptions, guardianships, and a lot of custody and divorce litigation. I burnt on that a little bit and then went over to the University of Hawaii at Manoa, Myron B. Thompson School of Social Work, where I taught history and policy for almost 8 years, actually. And I had my daughter there. This is an old picture. They're bigger now. They're 16, 14, and 12. So this was maybe 3 years ago. I probably should update it. And I'll just warn you guys, I've done this slideshow before. Usually it's a little bit longer. And so I'm gonna speed through. Let's go to this. So first thing we got to just all kind of wrap our brains around is that it is not divorce and custody, excuse me, it is not divorce and separation that is harmful to kids. It's conflict. It's true for babies who are absorbing that toxicity of, parents when they're fighting. It's true for adult children. The New York Times actually wrote an article not that long ago about how divorce is impacting adult children. And we've all heard about the graying of divorce. That's a real phenomenon. And older folks are divorcing at higher rates than they used to. I won't go through all these statistics, but basically, we worried because, prior to the 1980s, I think maybe 1 in 10 marriages ended in divorce. People just didn't do it. But with no fault and with women going back to work and a lot of changes and shifts in society, we are now, it is close to 50% of marriages that do end in divorce. And what I want to underscore here is that divorce is not a failure. You can divorce amicably and fairly and respectfully. And sometimes it is the right thing for people to move on. I am not a proponent of divorce by any stretch of the imagination, but I know that for some folks, I always talk to some clients where it's like, well, what do you want for your kids? And they say, well, I want to be happy and I want to be successful and I want them. It's okay. Well, if you want them to be happy, you need to be modeling happiness, because how else are they supposed to know what that looks like? And if people are in really unhappy relationships, then, maybe divorce is the right answer. I'm not going to play this link, but if you haven't heard of the adverse childhood experience study, it's really kind of fascinating. They followed people across a lifespan. Kaiser did this study. And basically, one of the adverse experiences that negatively impacts children is high conflict, divorce or separation. And that can not just lead to, I mean, you might guess, like the anxiety, depression, mental health, substance abuse, maybe even, dangerous sexual behavior, but it also leads to like physical problems. And so if you have time and can watch Dr. Brooke Harris's TED Talk, it's really good. And it really succinctly gives you a sense of the ACEs study. This is a photo of our Kapolei Judiciary Complex out there. And I just wanted to show it so you could kind of get a sense of what happens to families if they cannot resolve their agreements or their divorce on their own, right? I think that, again, as a society, when divorce became more common in the 80s, we went straight to this adversarial litigation model that personally I don't think is really appropriate. I think families are better served by getting a therapist, talking to a financial planner. Ideally, we want people to be able to sit down and talk through it. Sometimes that's too hard and we have to bring in a mediator. There are a lot of divorces being filed in First Circuit is Oahu, right? So there's a lot of divorces being filed, and our judges are wonderful people. They try really hard. They're very, very smart, but they don't have time to hear all of the motions. And then they're also not just dealing with a divorce calendar, they're dealing with paternity, which is custody, but also restraining orders, adoption, guardianships, child welfare, delinquency. So there's a lot of families going out there to let judges make decisions on their behalf. So you guys probably know a lot about alternatives to litigation. Let me see if I can pull out of this. Oops. Anyway, I was gonna show you another chart, but I'll do that later. But there's different ways. It doesn't have to be traditional mediation. You could look at collaborative law. You could look at lawyer negotiation, arbitration, where you actually hire a private judge to make the decision for you. And then of course there's court. But what I like to tell parents is, look, our judges work hard. They care a lot. They don't love your kids. And it would be a lot better if you guys can figure out a way to reach an agreement, because at the end of the day, you can say, yes, I can live with that, or no, I can't. I think you guys all know about mediation, generally speaking, so I'm not going to go into this. There's a lot of benefits. And I think especially for family cases where, as we know, they're going to have ongoing relationships with their kids, or sometimes ongoing relationships with their adult children, if it's an older, agreeing divorce. And then again, like looking at the process, whether we meet jointly or separately, we were actually just talking about this in our team meeting this morning about how to be really purposeful as mediators in deciding what we're going to do next. Are we going to do a joint session? Are we going to do a separate session? Why? What are we going to say? What are we going to lead with? So I think being good at settling cases means being really purposeful and thoughtful about how and why we make each move. And again, we control the process, they control the outcome. It is not our fault if we can't reach an agreement, if we've done everything we can to try to get them there. I love the flexibility of mediation. I love Zoom. I love sharing screens. I love being able to bring people in person. I actually just last week did it in person on Kona again. I hadn't flown to a neighbor island in ages to do mediation since 2020 and COVID. But now there are times when in person is better, and there are times when Zoom is better. And I always tell people, I want you to be in a position to make good decisions and feel safe, right? And so if that's drinking a cup of tea on your couch in your jammies, let's do Zoom. Or if it's coming into office and we'll all put on shoes and pants and we will talk to each other, we can do that as well. And both have their value. We always talk about the styles of mediation and everybody wants to be transformational. And I always kind of go back to, you just need them all. There's nothing, it's hard. We're really doing hard work. And there's never a time where I've ever been solely facilitative or solely evaluative, or, I feel like they're like tools that you have in a kit that you have to be able to use when you can. And again, there's a lot of benefits to it. You guys, it's like speaking to the preaching to the choir. Here's another video about how we know mediation can actually work. I'm not going to play it. These are the statutes. So I guess when we talk about evaluative mediation, and I will admit I'm probably more on the evaluative side of things, I think it helps for folks to know what's going to happen if they can't reach an agreement, right? And so knowing the law, knowing the judges, knowing what outcomes we've seen, knowing what not just what the statutes say, but what we've seen judges order, what we've seen other families agree to, I think that can be very, very helpful. So these are just the statutes that I do still do to the child welfare mediations. I've been getting a few legal guardianships from the courts where you've got a grandparent that's been raising a child for a very long time, but now a parent who has a constitutionally protected right to raise a child has popped in. And I think what the judges would hope for is that the family can come together and reach an agreement as opposed to having the law come in and make an order that may not be tenable for one or both sides. So this just kind of gives you a background on the statutes. I really think our best interest statute is interesting and worth paying attention to because it has so many factors. It does make it, a complex assessment. And I think one thing I will highlight is, oh, never mind. I'm not going to go there. But yeah, so this is basically the standard, I mean, that we're going to use to decide what is in a child's best interest. And the hard part is because there's so many factors, in a trial situation, so much evidence can come in, right? You can't say, oh no, that's irrelevant, Your Honor. It's very likely relevant in some of these. And so again, the cost, expense, and time of litigation can really add up. And especially when parents know their kid, they love their kid, and they're in the best place, I think at least, to make decisions for them. This comes from Bill Eddy. He has some really great information on how to work with high conflict folks. And so I highly, and especially those with personality disorders, because that can be really, really challenging. I know our family courts tend to call them frequent flyers because they come back, right? Anything about kids is modifiable post-decree or after the custody determination has been made. And so a lot of times people are using the courthouse as a revolving door, and they're going back and asking for, even maybe just days after their trial was decided. And so that can be really, really difficult, really hard on families. So this is just some general information. And then I think we have to be real about, there are times when mediation isn't going to work, right? And I always try to balance it because I want a settlement agreement. I want these families to be able to walk away from this, wake up tomorrow morning and not have that conflict hanging over their head. I want the kids to know who's picking them up from school on Friday, right? But we're not judges. We can't make decisions. And so at some point, I tell people I'm not going to waste your time and my money if we're not making progress here. Even if it's just incremental, I want to see progress. So settlement agreements aren't 100%. There's also some issues with procedural and constitutional protections. You can't set legal precedent. So there's no, case law coming out of mediation. I think one of the big ones is no formal discovery. If someone is not going to be transparent and they're not going to share their information, that is a real situation where I think mediation may not work. And so I'm not one of those mediators that says you have to halt all litigation while we're mediating. I can concurrently work. If you've got a motion on the table, sometimes that creates more pressure and it helps get a settlement done. If they won't give you their bank statements, and we all know they're entitled to them, go ahead and do formal discovery, and we can pause mediation until we have the information we need. And then finally, the big caveat to when mediation is not going to be appropriate is when there's been intimate partner violence or even just an unequal distribution of power. I mean, you got a breastfeeding mother and a very young child, or a parent who has all the account information and the other parent has none. Like, those are power imbalances that make staying neutral, I think, challenging from time to time. This is just for people who don't really know mediation, some videos showing you how it works. And then these are just different examples of when and how, obviously our firm is Family Mediation Hawaii, so we really focus on kids, but we have adults who don't have children that just want an uncontested divorce working with us. And yeah, I mean, this is just sort of a visual to give you a sense of when we can engage. How do we know mediation works? There's actually a lot of information out there on the success rates. And, as you can see, 85% of all mediations can result in settlement. I think a lot of it has to do with that feeling heard, respected, giving a chance to say their piece, not feeling too pressured to reach agreements. And then also trying to build. So I always tell people I'm working myself out of a job, right? That's an old social work thing. I'm going to work myself out of a job and give you unconditional positive regard, right? And so those are the ways that we help people learn. I always say, okay, negotiation 101, somebody makes an offer. You have three options. You can either say, yes, I agree, maybe, but I'll get back to you by Wednesday at 5, or no. But if it's no, you have to make a counter offer, and you have to, it has to be different from something you already offered, right? And I think what's happened so much with these families is someone makes an offer, it makes the other person angry, and they just say, well, no, I'm out. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. And then it shuts down communication. And that's, I think, one of the basic things that families can learn how not to do in the future. And again, with mediation, you guys probably all know this, but it's more durable, right? People are going to adhere to an agreement that they signed off on, as opposed to being ordered to do something by a judge. And then we also see this, we always talk about how it's important for kids to have meaningful access to both parents in a safe way. We don't know what that always means. It's not always 50-50, right? It's not always about equal time for parents, because parents have a right to it. But I think the fact that especially fathers or maybe parents who haven't had as much time with a child remain more involved in their kids' lives, that's good for kids. I've got 3 kids, right? They're constantly moving the ball. They're so hard all the time. Jose and I were talking about, parenting and raising kids just before this. And it's helpful to have other adults who care about your children and love them the way that you do. So I'm hitting my 20 minutes. I have resources that I usually give, but I love the Mediation Center of the Pacific. If you guys haven't already been through their trainings, I think they're excellent. I've gone up to, Strauss Institute at Pepperdine, and I've done Bill Eddy trainings. I go to the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, and they're great. But I think as far as pure mediation trainings, what Tracy guys do over there is just excellent. We are working really hard. I'm actually co-chairing the child law section, but we want more mental health professionals to be willing to work with these families. Court-involved families are really, really hard to work with. And a lot of times therapists really don't want to get involved if they know you've got lawyers and you're going to go to court. They don't want to be subpoenaed, and they certainly don't want to have to testify. And so part of our mission over there at the child law section is to try to keep the mental health clinicians safe from the litigation, but then so that they will work with these families, because that's really oftentimes what they need. And then, of course, there's a lot of different private mediation programs, other programs that are available to help, with the goal being, okay, if we can achieve better outcomes for families, that's really the hope. So with that, I want to stop sharing my screen and see, Jose, I can talk really fast.
That was amazing. And some folks in the audience were, well, I know some folks were hoping for copies of the slides. I know I'm wonderful.
I'll send you these because I updated them right before we started.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And then also just letting folks know this is being recorded, and it'll be added to the YouTube channel that was posted in the chat earlier. And I can post that a little later as well. I just want to kind of touch upon the questions that our audience has first, and then I'll kind of jump in here. But someone asked about you showed the BIF and what is their role? You briefly showed the BIF, and they were wondering what is the role of the BIF?
Oh, a best interest fact finder?
Yes.
Okay, so if you're going to go to court, right, there are what's called social studies, right? So a custody evaluator is actually defined by 571-46. At this point, it's a mental health practitioner. So you either need to be a psychiatrist, a psychologist, licensed clinical social worker, marriage and family therapist. I think there's a little catch-all for everybody. So custody evaluations are essentially social studies where they come and talk to your family, they meet with the children, hopefully they do a home study, they talk to collateral contacts, and they write up a report, oftentimes with recommendations for custody. So that's a whole process that can help the family court. If judges need to be making a decision, they do like to have these social studies in advance because there's just more information coming through them. Now, Hawaii, prior to the statute being passed, I forget, it was like 2010, it was a long time ago, on custody evaluators, we used to use lawyers to do custody evaluations, and we called them custody evaluations. And then the folks from the continental US came in and said, no, those should be done by mental health practitioners. And so we changed it, and now mental health practitioners do custody evaluations. However, we have this carve out in the event that either the custody evaluators aren't available, or both parties and their attorneys agree, so there has to be a stipulation to a BIF, a best interest fact finder will come in and do a similar study. They go through all those factors in the statute that I show you on what is it in the child's best interest. They have to go through them. They interview the child, they interview the parents, and then they write reports. And so they're very similar processes. They're meant to be helpful to the court. I call them forensic in nature, as opposed to clinicians who do therapy and are there to help the clients, with their clinical goals. Forensic means your client is the court. And so if you're a best interest fact finder, you're a custody evaluator, you're a parenting coordinator, which is more like an arbiter for high conflict families, but they can make those folks will, if you're a forensic practitioner, you have to expect to go and testify. You have to expect to go to court. And I can give you lists of names. Actually, we've compiled a whole list of people who are doing this work. So they probably didn't want all that information, but I think
I love it. Thank you so much. We actually had someone in the audience who shared that they actually have a PhD in psychology, getting their mental health technician certificate in Hawaii, and would be happy to, collaborate. So I'm gonna refer them to contacting you. But their MFT is from California though, so I think I don't know how that works,
the
but
license. Well, no, but so yes, contact me, and I will just do a plug. Our child law section is doing a Pauhana next Tuesday, April 23rd at Murphy's Bar and Grill from 5:30 to 7:30. It's a free for all. It's no host. We're just all going to be there hanging out. So feel free to come by. We're again trying to foster more relationships between the family law practitioners, because we all know each other real well. But what we really want to bring in is the mental health people.
love it. Thank you so much. Then the other, so let's see. Well, if anyone in the audience has any questions, please feel free to add it to the chat. So I'll go a little bit. Thank you so much for encompassing everything. And honestly, you could have even added a little more if you wanted to, but I know there's a plethora of
I
information
can talk more if you want me to.
First off, so I know, especially here in Hawaii, anyone who wants to go through divorce, they are mandated to go through mediation, which has been really wonderful. I think as an opportunity for them to like be able to talk things out. But unfortunately, the terminology mandated isn't something that is ever well received. So how do you approach the negative impressions that come along with that terminology, or like how do you settle folks' nerves? Like any strategies you may have?
No, that's a great question. So, I mean, fundamentally, I see mediation as a voluntary process. Mediation is not therapy, but sometimes the courts will also mandate therapy. It's not effective if someone is resistant and doesn't want to change or doesn't want to engage in the process. And I think the same is true for mediation. So, I mean, there is a reality to these folks. If they come in and they don't at least attempt mediation in good faith, the judge, may not look happily on them. But even our mediation agreement, it talks about voluntariness. Right now, the way the law stands is that they have to at least attempt mediation before filing a motion to set a case for trial. But our judges are going a little bit further than that. They're actually ordering mediation on what we call the pre-decree calendar, right? Because everything in divorce is measured. Are you divorced? If you're not, you're pre-decree. And then if you're divorced, and if you're still fighting afterwards, then you're post-decree, right? And so they have, their calendars. So I think that the judges have authority, and they've found it in not just the statutes, but the court rules to order people into mediation. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. There's some attorneys around town who they hate mediation. They hate custody evaluators. They hate all of it. They just want to litigate. And maybe it's because they think that that's the best way to get justice for their clients, but it's also the way they can make a lot of money. And so there's that. We recorded this, damn it. Okay, that's fine. I said it. But you all know it. And so with the mandated,
I
I
can edit
think,
out if you want.
huh? Oh, it's
I
fine.
can edit out.
It's okay. I'm pretty opinionated. People know it. Yeah, I think if it's, yeah, I tell them it is voluntary. I tell them they don't have to be here. And frankly, if people are just gonna stonewall the process, or they just want to use it for discovery purposes, or they're just trying to, check the box. I went to mediation, now give me my trial. I can sniff that out pretty fast. And honestly, there are so many families that genuinely do want to settle their disputes, that I think if folks really feel strongly and they want to litigate, go for it. I mean, it's going to cost you a lot of time and money, but I get it. And there are certain situations where I think litigation is actually the right route.
Thank you. Are there other aspects of life or professional in your professional perspective that you think would benefit from mandated mediation
Hmm.
besides the
Mandated. I mean, I think so, like kids first, right? In order to get divorced in Hawaii, you have to go through the kids first program. That's a mandated education program. Um, I think it's helpful. I think some people might not want to go at first, and then I hear them, they're like, "Oh, it really wasn't that bad," or it gave us an opportunity to talk to the kids. It kind of opened the window. Um, I actually think, if we could do education followed by mediation and everybody was in therapy, I think a lot of these cases would settle. Right? I mean, it's timing on some level. Sometimes the case isn't ready for a full-blown settlement, and maybe we're just doing some like temporary, like, okay, what are we doing for summer? What are we doing? But a lot of what I'm doing is education. And so like I get couples coming in, especially when they're not represented by counsel, and they're like, well, she left the house, so she doesn't get to see the kids. And so that's part of my job, is to be like, well, no, that's not how this works. Like, we're going to come up with a time sharing schedule, and you can't punish someone in a divorce situation. And it's about the kids having the right to see both parents, not about the parents fighting over what they believe is their. So I kind of went out of your question, but where else would there? I don't know. I mean, the mandated piece is tricky because I do think when people are forced to do it, I mean, it's just like, I made my kid eat broccolini last night and I found most of it in the trash, right? I mean, it doesn't work.
I find myself having to negotiate with some kind of something sweet afterward or some kind of cheese and carb. That's normally how I negotiate vegetables.
Okay,
So
so here's you have to take one bite of everything and
yes,
then it's the rainbow, right? Anyways, but you have little kids. Mine, eventually they all eat and they all poop in the toilet, God willing,
yes,
sleep through the night.
yes, thank you. Um, one of our audience had a question. Do you see any differences between children in divorce cases versus paternity cases?
Oh, that's interesting. The hard part about divorce is because you have the added issues of property division and spousal support, they tend to take longer. Um, and that, of course, adversely impacts children. I think, I mean, I'll just say it, the paternity cases, I think you see not always, but there's this, well, it's hard to say. It's hard to say. But I think paternity cases, if you've got a paternity case where the parents were living together in a long-term relationship, having, one, maybe two or three kids, they look more like the divorce cases. The paternity cases where they're a one-night stand. Oh, and by the way, he suggested I have an abortion, so I don't want to let him have the baby because he's going to kill it, which is not really a fair thing to say, but like that, I've heard that argument multiple times, right? So where there's no trust, where they haven't been together they weren't really committed to one another, but now there's a baby. Those cases can be really, really difficult. I also think when you have very young children, it's very difficult developmentally to have sort of equal time sharing, right? Because we're really concerned about attachment. We're really worried, making sure that if the child is still breastfeeding, if the child, maybe hasn't spent a lot of time with, usually it's the dad at that point. But it can go either way. Um, those cases tend to look different because we need transitions. If both parents have been actively involved on a daily basis with the kid, whether they're married or not, the custody outcomes, I think, are pretty similar. Um, but the level of conflict is all across the board. I mean, you see actually people who were divorced in long marriages going at it just as much as you see people who never really knew each other. I mean, I think I like to quote the Lumineers, the opposite of love is indifference. And for a lot of these folks, they're fighting because they don't have closure and they're so upset. And this is a person who they were totally close with and loved and adored, and now they're enemies. And it's awful. It's terrifying. And it's really, really hard to get the perspective that they need I mean, I always tell people, you got to love your kids more than you hate your ex.
No, thank you. Thank you. That's wonderful words of wisdom. Do you have a tip for another question from the audience? Do you have a tip for mediators dealing with family issues?
Oh, let's see. There are lots. I mean, okay, I see Tom DeGrazia out there, he would always say, like, get a picture of the kid and put the kid in so that everybody can see their kid, which I really love. It works. It reminds them that what we're here for. I've often said, well, do you think your ex loves the kids? Because very few people will say no. Sometimes they do, and if they do, that's a red flag that there's mental health issues. But most of them say, no, they love them. They just are terrible parents, or they just don't, they're neglectful, or they'd rather be on their phone, and then, but you can use that, right? So when you go and talk to the other spouse or the other parent, you can say, well, they say, they admit, like, you love this child. Like, you got to try to build little things that you can build on, can really help get you the momentum that you need to take it across the finish line. I think it does help. So I always joke, like, my 3 kids, right? Who in the world says 3 kids actually help them do better at their job? But mine do, right? And so I think having some knowledge of child development and what a 3-year-old can tolerate versus what a 13-year-old can tolerate versus, and even as I learn and grow, like 16-year-olds, and now they have phones, and what are the rules about the phones? Who's going to discipline? Can you take it away at one house and then give it back at the other? Like, what are the rules? And so I think just educating yourself on child development and having that subject matter expertise, I think I know, I already said how much I love MCP, but they teach facilitated mediation. And I think sometimes having a little bit of evaluative in there to kind of at least just poke a little, well, you sure? Because if you're going to do week on, week off with a 2-year-old, that's going to be pretty hard unless, like, I think arming yourself with some of that knowledge and information can be helpful. Tips for, family issues are tricky. I think it's always deep listening, right? It's always really trying to understand, where is this person coming from, and connecting to them. I already mentioned the social work term, and I see Mike D'Amato's on here. He was my social work, but unconditional positive regard. And so that, I think, is a lot of what we have to do as mediators with our clients. Because sometimes, I'm not going to lie, I really don't like this person, right? And you have to find something that you can connect with, can care about, can admire in them. Because I think if they see you as the enemy, you're not going to be effective.
Thank you. Thank you so much for and just to let folks know, because I know we have some folks who are not from Oahu. So Mediation to the Pacific is a mediation center on Oahu, but there are definitely mediation centers on other islands, such as the Kauai Economic Opportunity Incorporated Mediation Program. On Maui, there's Maui Mediation Services, and then the Hawaii Island, we have West Hawaii Mediation Center, as well as Kokahi Mediation Center. Just so another question that's come in, any comments on custody issues involving one parent on the mainland, also relocation of one parent due to military service? I realize that there are a lot of parameters involved. It just seems it could be very messy.
Oh yeah, we could do a whole hour on relocation. I always say, like, only people who are crazy go to trial, right? But that's not true with relocation cases, because there's no way to split the baby. It's just, somebody's going to be the school time parent and somebody's going to be the vacation parent. And we're going to have a lot of airline tickets to pay for in it as well. So it's a hard issue to manage. I think we see a lot of custody evaluations and best interest fact finder reports being done on these cases. That's a really expensive thing to do, because a lot of times you're flying that person up. And I did one where the guy charged $100,000, took a year to do it. He billed those family for every hour he was on the airplane to go up and look at the Washington State relocation for mom. And the reality is the judges are going to look at what's in the best interest of the child. They're going to look at the statute and the factors. They also look at, like, what are the connections and what are the reasons for relocation, right? Military service is an obvious one that we deal with a lot. And that's, obviously, well, I'm getting transferred for my job in order to support this family is a better reason than, well, my new boyfriend lives up there and I want to go live with him, right? So and they're also going to look at the connections between. So, like, if the family all lived in Idaho and came from Idaho, and now dad wants to go back to Idaho, that's going to be different than, oh, well, I feel like I want to move to South Korea now, or wherever you're going to go, right? So there's a lot of more considerations, in fact, in relocation cases, more cost. It's the parent who wants to move with the children's burden to show that it is going to be better for that child in the new place. And because we start with the premise of consistency and stability is good for kids, it can be a pretty heavy lift, especially if the parent who's remaining in Hawaii is a decent parent and has been involved. So yeah, they're really fraught. They're really difficult. They're harder to settle. But we also have, I mean, we've set them, and sometimes it's both parents move. Why don't you all, can you get a job up there? Can you transfer? Or are we going to wait until the child finishes the school year and then everybody moves together? I mean, if there, and I've had that happen where we found ways to keep the family together. And we like to remind folks, you're still a family. Even if you no longer, even if the child's living in two separate households, you are still a family. And that's important. It's important for the kids to know as well.
Thank you. Another question from our friend Tom here. What has been your experience, if any, with utilizing grandparents with the permission of the conflicted participants in the mediation process?
So I don't know if you want to call it a policy, but the way I roll, or I mean, even this one on Kona last week where grandpa participated with mom, if they're part of the decision-making team, I want them at the table. Same with lawyers. Don't tell me, oh, I want to save money and my lawyer's not here, because the second you leave, your lawyer's going to rip this agreement apart because they didn't hear the same thing that you did. Right. And I don't want people being stuck in that space. And so while I don't like to do joint sessions where you've got grandparents, because if grandparent, is say going off about how terrible their, the in-law is, I don't want the in-law to have to sit through that, much like I don't want the lawyers, making arguments with the opposing party in the Zoom room or at the mediation. I think if we're doing separate sessions, I'm happy to have new girlfriends, new boyfriends, grandparents. I mean, actually this one was funny. When I first started meeting in this case, we were on Zoom and I'm looking and I could see like somebody in the mirror behind her. There was like a closet mirror. And I was like, who's in the room with you? And of course her dad was in there. And I was like, it's okay. Like, just tell, it's fine. Like, people shouldn't have to hide. And I would rather, because I see it all the time on Zoom, you can't control it. Right. And so the way they look up all of a sudden, and it's like, they got people in there, they could be recording on their phone, even in person. Like, you never know. And so, and we tell them it's confidential. We ask them not to do all of that, obviously. But to me, I think I want all the decision makers there because I don't want the person, sorry, they're building. I think the fire alarm is going off, but it's not real. It happens from time to time. But yeah, so I like to have everybody that's going to, and also grandparents can be hugely helpful. A lot of them, especially in Hawaii where you got two parents working, you need them to agree to the pickup and drop off schedule because they're going to be the one waiting car line, right? And so I can't, if they're going to be a part of the agreement, then I definitely want them there signing off on it.
Thank you. A bit of a follow-up from someone else. So what are grandparents' rights in cases where mom might be drinking/using and dad might show signs of Stockholm syndrome?
That's specific, but so basically grandparents' rights there's a Supreme Court case, the US Supreme Court, Troxel v. Granville, which basically says grandparents don't have visitation rights. And that was a case where I think the father had passed away and paternal grandparents were just trying to get visits and mom was refusing. And the Supreme Court said, you know what? Parents have a constitutionally protected right to raise their children and you cannot abrogate that. Now in Hawaii, our statute actually said that anybody that's had the care and custody of the child for the last 60 days can apply for custody. So that's kind of different than what the federal law says. So we definitely, I think the issue is this specific, I would probably say it would be up to child welfare to come in and assess whether mom's drinking or using or dad's mental health issues rise to the level of like, does this kid need protection? And so grandparents they're supposed to be allowed to anonymously report 832-533-5300. Anyways, this child welfare, I used to know it. I used to have it in my head, but now I never call it anymore. But yeah, so you can report and then the state will do an assessment. And if there are like severe safety issues, then the state might remove and then place with grandparents, right? But I would caution that approach because I've heard anecdotally that sometimes whoever does the report is not confidential and now parents know, and now parents are not happy with you. So you just have to be careful.
Thank you. A couple more questions here from the audience. The updated 2024 Child Support Guidelines worksheet recently took effect on April 1st, 2024. Have you seen any recent mediations yet where one or both parties are trying to mediation a modification of child support or child custody based on the updated CSGW?
Yes, so I was actually on the Child Support Guidelines Committee, and there's some pretty interesting changes there, especially for low income payors. The child support amount has gone down. So especially if you have, and so this was a conversation, right? Because it's like CSEA doesn't want to have to deal with all the modification actions if it starts flooding them. So I don't know if that's happened, I've definitely, we've been using the new guidelines. Um, I think people assume that their child support is going to go up, so they don't want to recalculate, right? Because there's a cost of living adjustment that's based on the federal poverty standard. So that automatically goes into play. But what they might not realize is that the calculation was adjusted so that if you have very low income as the payor, the person who owes obligor, the person who owes child support, you actually may want to recalculate because your child support could go down.
Thank you. So pushing for me, should teenagers be at the table? What if a son wants to stay with mom, but the brother wants to live with dad?
Okay, that's a hard one.
Little
So we
messy.
get this a lot. When can my child choose who they want to live with? And in Hawaii, there is no age, right? There's other states where I believe there's like a specific age. At that point, the kid can choose. Um, Generally, these get sort of rounded into the resist refuse cases. Um, for the most part, most parents that I've worked with don't want to split their kids up. It's a false alarm. Sorry, it's me. This is me. I
We,
know. Thank you,
we,
Brett. I know. So they just had to do it during this 1 hour of
we,
the
we,
day,
cou- we
right?
couldn't really hear much of it, so it's okay. No
Okay,
worries.
sorry, I hear it. It's
Yeah.
distracting. So the resist refuse cases, and we're seeing more of them. And actually, at one point, Diane Medeiros, who's the lead judge of the divorce court, was saying, well, maybe we should have like a resist refuse courtroom, right? The way we have girls' court or drug court or juvenile drug court, because we're seeing so many of these cases and the kids are getting younger, like 11, 12 years old, and they're just refusing to go. And you can see it because what happens is it's generally a really high conflict divorce. They tend to align with the more vulnerable parent. So often it's the parent who's really sad, doesn't want the divorce, is creating the narrative, or at least not creating the narrative, I shouldn't say that, but communicating the narrative to the child. Your mother left us. She has a new family. She doesn't love us anymore. Um, and I think what happens for kiddos, when they're little, they kind of go back and forth, 7, 8, 9 years old. They get to a point where if the parents are fighting like that, they can't hold both realities in their head and they just pick one. Um, and sometimes it is justified rejection. Sometimes a kid saw mom, punch dad in the face, or they saw, dad did a terrible thing and he drinks all the time. Anyway, I won't go there. But like sometimes it's justified rejection. And the hard part is we never really know from the outside as mediators. I'm trained in child inclusive mediation, but I don't like to do it if I don't have to. I don't want the kid to feel like they have to choose, right? I think that's really unhealthy for children. I always tell the story. My dad is like 82 now, but when he was 8 years old, his parents split up. They lived on Maui. His mom was going to move to Oahu, and they let him pick who he wanted to live with. And he still gets upset. And he says, I picked my mom because I knew my dad would be okay without me, but it was awful. And I think the message to children needs to be, we both love you. We both want you. We're going to figure it out. And if we can't, then a judge is going to make a decision. But it's not, hey, kid, where do you want to live? And that I think I've seen it so many times by well-meaning parent, but they don't realize that they want to give their child a voice and they care. But it's like, are you really going to let the kid decide if he goes to school or not? Are you going to let him decide whether or not he's getting that shot or eating his vegetables? Like, why is this something that the 6-year-old can decide, right? And so there's a lot of that, and trying to figure out, like, is it estrangement? Is it justified? Is it rejection? I mean, just trying to figure out like how much poisoning of the well has the aligned parent done. Sometimes there hasn't been really. I mean, so it's hard to assess these situations because they run the gamut of like, you know, and so no, let me go back to the question. Teenagers at the table, I'm reluctant to do that. If the child has a therapist, I'm willing to talk to the child's therapist. That's my favorite way to do it. That being said, I have been brought into cases where the courts order me to be the guardian ad litem and represent the child's best interest. And in those cases, I do have to talk to the child and make recommendations. It's a little different from being a custody evaluator or best interest fact finder. You essentially represent the child. But it's if at all possible, parents should be making these decisions and kids shouldn't be asked to choose, even if they want to.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for clarifying that.
Oh, one more thing.
Yes.
The experts that we brought in for the child law section last year, we had, oh gosh, Robin Deutsch, and she was out of Boston, and the gal out of Washington State. Anyways, they said that for those really bad resist refuse cases, you need a family therapist. You can't just have like mom's individual therapist, dad's individual therapist, or sometimes they'll say, well, the kid that doesn't want to see the rejected parent, let's put them in therapy together. But unless you have the aligned parent in there hearing the same things and changing that system, like D'Amato's family systems, you're not going to be able to make progress. Sorry.
No, nothing to apologize for. Thank you so much for all this wealth of knowledge. So, two-part question. So do you favor where possible intergender mediation with male-female peacemakers?
Oh, I would love that. Yes, yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Different ages, different ethnicities, different everything. I mean, just to, but it's financially, most families can't afford it. But I would love that.
The other
Love a
portion.
co-mediator just to talk to afterwards instead of like I go out there and I talk to my other mediators and we just lie on the ground and hit our heads against the wall.
Uh, why do you think divorce rates among couples under 50 years old has been significantly lowered?
Because they're not getting married. The young people don't get married. They have children and they buy houses together, but they do not get married. And so, I mean, I don't know. I think marriage is a protection. I mean, this is how I'm getting old, right? When I was young, I met my husband. I'm like, we don't have to get married. Let's just have kids. And he's like, no, we're getting married. And now I'm like, no, you should get married because there's all this, yeah, no. So I think the young people, they've seen their parents' terrible divorces. They don't want to commit. They don't want to get married. But without the protections of the spousal support law and the property division laws, if you are the stay-at-home spouse who's taking care of that kiddo and the other person is out working, you're not financially protected if you don't get married. You'll get child support, but that's it.
No, thank you. So this kind of brings us a little bit to some of the questions I had because so you talked about having a co-mediator and maybe you can just share a little bit about how you take care of yourself or practice self-care. I mean, you're constantly dealing with other people's issues.
I have an excellent therapist.
Thank you. Thank you for really
Since
taking
COVID, I do not mediation. I do yoga and I try to meditate for 10 minutes every morning and I try to get home and make dinner for my family every evening. And those things make me happy.
these traditions.
And sometimes I think, I mean, yeah, it's hard. Everybody's like, do you always hear all these horrible stories? But at the end of the day, if I'm at home and my husband's watching basketball and I'm like, why am I cooking dinner and you're watching basketball? But you know what? My life isn't that bad. Like I've seen the child welfare cases. I've seen the, kids falling out windows and having horrible, parents dying with, I mean, it's just, there's awful. Life is about tragedy and pain and it's everywhere. And when you have those windows into people's lives, it makes you a little bit grateful that maybe we're not having to deal with something that serious right now.
Thank you for providing a perspective, an opportunity to shift our perspective. Thank you. I know in our previous conversations leading up to this, you talked a little bit about exploring ways to shift our perspective once more on taking proactive steps in our lives. And you kind of talked a little bit about premarital mediation, where folks exploring that. Could you tell us a little bit more about it? Who do you recommend it for? Is it similar to like what folks do with like a pastor sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you start working with people downstream, you start to realize, wait a second, we should be doing this earlier. We should be preventing these things from having happened. And I tell my three kids all the time, like, be so careful who you marry. And actually, David Brooks had an op-ed in the New York Times not that long ago. And it was called, "To Be Happy, Marriage Matters More Than Your Career." So if you're happy with your partner and you're happy with your marriage, that's actually more important that you have those relationships than if you like your job. And so he had all these measurements. Did I write some of them down? Oh, I highlighted them. But like the University of Chicago economist Sam Peltzman published a study in which he found that marriage was the most important differentiator between happy and unhappy people. There's statistics. I can actually send you guys the article. I thought it was good. And so for premarital mediation, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, it comes out of more religious, spiritual practices where you have to talk about like the hard questions. And sometimes I'm shocked. Like you guys didn't discuss how many kids you wanted to have or where you wanted to live. Those are basics. But I think communication, expectations, finances, marital roles, who's cleaning the toilet, how much are you going to work, how many kids, like who's waking up at night with the babies. I think a lot of couples, because of the nature of first love, or I shouldn't say first love, of love and the way it feels, and it's so great, they just don't have those conversations. Marriage is one of the few things where there's no informed consent. because we don't know where you're going to get divorced and the laws are different between states, we don't tell people like, okay, so if you get like what is a partnership model of property division. So you get a credit for what you had as of the date of marriage, and you get a credit for gifts or inheritances received during the marriage. But if they appreciate, that's a 50-50 asset subject to division and divorce. And I'm so bad. I'm like telling my kids, I'm like, so you need to know what are all your assets and what are all your debt on the date of marriage, because the banks don't keep records that far back. And if you want to be able to get your capital contributions credited, anyway. And my husband, I'm like, we should get them premarital agreements. He's like, no, absolutely not. Anyway, so and there's different ways to, but I think with premarital counseling, a lot of it should be about communication. A lot of it should be about expectations. I don't think we should, I don't know if the religious guys do this, but I don't think we should hide the ball. It's like, how many times a week do you expect to have sex? I think a lot of people are very dissatisfied with their marriage because they're not having sex. Actually, and then when you look at the reasons people cite for divorce, the number one is a lack of commitment, right? So they feel like the other partner is not really a partner. They're not helping them pull their weight. John Gottman has a whole institute. He talks about the bids for affection, and like he says he can tell like if couples are going to stay married by just watching them for a few minutes. And really, it's like when someone holds out their hand, if the other person takes it versus doesn't, right? Those little bids that happen all the time. But I think really feeling like you have a partner in life who's carrying their weight is a I hear that a lot as a reason for divorce. So again, having the conversation about who's going to do what and when and how. 60% of marriages, they talk about infidelity. But with infidelity, I always wonder, is that a symptom or is that the cause? Like a lot of times it's a symptom. If marriage is supposed to be a monogamous relationship and one party fails, okay, that's not nice. But then what if the other party was like, well, I'm not having sex with you ever again, I'm done. Like, should you have to live your whole life and not ever have sex again? I don't think that's really what you signed up for. And so I think we should be having these conversations, because I guarantee you, I mean, I didn't have those conversations with my husband. No one's going to be like, okay, how much sex are we going to have after this marriage? And frankly, no one's going to know, because you feel so different after the first baby's born. And maybe it was great before, and now you're like, we need a break. Like, no. But, you have to be able to talk about it. And then 24% of marriage divorces, they say, it's a result of intimate partner violence. And that's a whole different beast. I mean, if you're being hurt in your marriage, if you're being hurt in your relationship, obviously physical abuse is unacceptable, but power and control is tricky, and psychological abuse, it exists, and we see it. I mean, we see people saying, well, if you leave me, I'm going to kill myself. Like that's a form of psychological abuse. And I think it goes back to, again, if we want to get upstream, and we need to educate young people about what a healthy relationship looks like, right? I mean, I think some people think, oh, he's jealous, he loves me. And it's like, well, no, let's talk about that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. That was amazing. A couple comments from the audience. They suggested walk your kids through the property division chart before they get married.
But what if they get divorced in Utah?
Yeah. Psychological terrorism was another comment. Here's a question. Is there any practical differences between premarital mediation and a prenuptial agreement?
I mean, I think that premarital mediation could be with the purpose of creating a prenuptial or premarital agreement, right? Those terms are synonymous. But it could also be without a premarital agreement, just a setting of expectations and guidelines and understandings, right? So for premarital agreement, and I don't know if this is fortunate or unfortunate, but the case law in Hawaii has followed the Barry Bonds case out of California. And so now, in order for premarital agreements to be, I mean, I will say our judges like to enforce premarital agreements, but the gold standard for premarital agreements are going to be both sides have attorneys, right? Both sides have been advised by their rights. They have to disclose all their assets, all their debt, right? If someone doesn't disclose something, I think sometimes, they can be invalidated, right? If they're not consistent with the law, and people fight them. People go to trial on this because it means a lot of money. I think that, and then that's an expensive concept, right? If we really want to create an unassailable premarital agreement, do we need to bring two attorneys? Because now we're all spending $1,000 an hour. But, I think as long as we tell people that, like, okay, it might not be enforced if you don't both have attorneys, but we can still help you draft agreements. Sometimes people just want communication plans versus like a property division guarantee. And then we always tell them, the kids are not fair game, right? So kids cannot be part of a premarital agreement. You can determine spousal support and property division, but anything about the kids is the court wants to see what's in the best interest of those children after they're born and they're out in the world doing their thing.
Thank you. A comment about sometimes the couple does not have anything, so they cannot afford two attorneys to draft and negotiate a prenuptial agreement. And then we had a question about what can we do for the abuser?
You mean as far as services?
I going to assume that's what they intended.
I mean, I think, we always used to send people to anger management and DVI classes. I think sometimes a good therapist who has some information on what happened could be helpful to the perpetrator. I mean, it's hard. A lot of times these folks were not taught how to properly engage in an intimate partner relationship. They don't have the skills. They don't know. They're desperate too. And so it can be really sad. I mean, and I also think the tricky piece is just because they were, it doesn't mean they don't get to see their kids, right? Especially if the kids are attached to them. And so these cases are never vanilla. And I think if we can try to have empathy for all those involved, Lisa, there's some men's groups. I think there's a guy, so the Hawaii Psychological Association put out like a whole group therapy list. Let me find it. But there's groups around. Go ahead. Sorry, I was reading Lisa's question.
Yeah, no, I know you went. I just for folks who are listening to this later, the question was, are there current anger management programs available for us to refer folks to? But take it away.
I think for anger management, honestly, group therapy could be very effective because you're hearing everybody else's stories, you're feeling supported, you're feeling like you're not alone in this. But I think they have to, feel safe and then be able to see that they do need to change, that it's not just an okay way to engage.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm looking, there's so many comments. Thanks, you guys.
No, this is thank you. You're stirring up some good conversation.
There was a guy named Chris Miller who used to have a nonviolent communication therapeutic. Actually, I think, Lisa, aren't you on his board? Isn't he supposed to be really good?
I don't know, but we have groups for. Oh, it says Pact and has groups
Oh,
for.
they have.
Yeah, Chris Miller, he does, yeah, he's a facilitator for nonviolent communication and he does some divorce mediation. So I'm not sure if he does anger management. So Chris Leong was the person like 10 years ago I used to send people and right, he would do group anger management. And so sometimes when I was doing a mediation and like both, maybe one person had more anger issues than the other, I'd send them both and I'd send them so they go to different groups, so they're not like sitting together in the same circle. But yeah, Chris Leong used to do really good group anger management, but I don't think he does it anymore. I think he's retired.
Yeah, here, I'm going to share my screen really fast. There's this is a Hawaii therapy groups. And then actually I also have, I don't know if there's sexual abuse survivors. There's an anger management. This looks like it's in Waikiki. I can send these links to you guys. But these are the groups that I understand the Hawaii Psychological Association has been sort of updating, and they're active now. And then also, if you are interested in like best interest fact finders, guardians ad litem, parenting coordinators, these are all people that work with, or if you're interested in being one of these resources for families, these are the education programs we've been able to. I had a wonderful intern this summer. She was amazing. And then I don't think Kim's doing anymore. Anyway, so these are just sort of, we for the child law section. And hey, if you're not, you can be a non-lawyer and join. And it's only like, I think it's like $40, but we do pauhanas and we have fun. But for working with court involved families, yeah, there's a lot of, we try to kind of share resources, figure out who's taking new cases. It's been really tricky to find therapists for families since COVID, pretty much.
Thank you so much, Katie. Just a couple questions. See, are there any parenting classes that both parents attend together that you recommend?
Let's see. Explore Counseling does families in transition. I think it's on Zoom. I'm not sure that they're there together. Alana Coffey has a co-parenting education course. I think she puts them on, it's like an 8-week cycle. I think she puts them separately. I think what those guys have told us is if they can do the education piece separately at first, then they could get a co-parent counselor, pay for it with insurance dollars. And that co-parent counselor could work with the parents together on their parenting, communication, decision-making about the kids. And that model has been effective. But what the therapist says is if we just go straight to co-parenting without the education to kind of underlie it, that it's still too hard. It's still too reactive and emotional. So I think, you know, they're looking at trying to do, yeah, I don't know of any. Now there's one called Up to Parents that I used to do that where you can basically check all your agreement. Like you're like, I don't want to put the child in the middle. We both agree. I want to put my child first to make sure they're healthy and, you know, all the good stuff. And we both agree. And then whatever you both agree to, they create this like aspirational checklist of things that you both agree to, but it's not an education. I mean, it has an education component, but it's still like a, yeah, it's not like typical where they're going to go through a curriculum and both parents hear the same things.
Thank you. I know we're at time and we have a couple extra questions, but I'm happy to stay on. I don't know about you. But one of the questions that was just about the wonderful resources you had. If there were resource lists on neighbor islands, I was going to suggest possibly contacting their local mediation centers, possibly. They might have a list internally that they may be able to share, unless you have other suggestions for that.
Yeah, I mean, some of our therapists, because we actually just went to Maui and did a presentation for the family court there. And so we have resources that are statewide. I will say the lion's share of them are on Oahu. So if you want like an in-person therapist on a neighbor island, it's hard. But I have some names if you've got yeah, I'm happy to share the links to all the
Yeah, so what I'll do is I will
yeah,
once you send me the material, I'll share it out with the folks who are here
perfect.
today. Thank you. And then there was a question about Kids First programs still offered through the courts anywhere in Hawaii.
Yeah, and they've gone back to in person, as I understand it. So they were online for quite a while, and I think it's gone back to in person. And I think they're better now. So for when I first started practicing, you had to get it because to get your divorce, you had to show that you completed Kids First, otherwise they wouldn't grant it. But with a paternity case, it's harder to ensure that they'd gone, and so it wasn't being consistently taken. And I think they've been able to update that so that everybody does have to go to Kids First. But you know, generally, Kids First isn't enough, right? It's like one day, it's a couple hours. I think a lot of these parents just, you know, yeah, they need more, and they need to understand why this is impactful to them and their children and how the conflict is negatively impacting their kids. It's not for a lot of them, I don't think they can see it. And that's the educational piece that we're trying to really like drive home.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for your wisdom, your guidance. I feel as though we're all students here and you're here to teach us. So thank you so much
I'm a
for
student too, but thank you, Jose. Thank you all for spending an hour with us. I appreciate your time, and it was fun. So I I appreciate you letting me rant on like that.
happy. Hey, anytime you want, let me know. Happy to. One of my last questions was just like, if you have any words of wisdom for other folks who are looking at a similar journey to go into family mediation potentially.
Call me. I mean, if you love what you do, that's a secret to a happy life. And as weird as it is, I love doing this. So, I mean, it's never boring. There's always more work to be done. Unfortunately, there are a lot of families, and the family law attorneys don't even call them back. I mean, they're too busy, even the bad ones. So, you know, I think if we can take the temperature down and create a new system for families where it's not like, oh, the default's we're going to go to court, right? Why should you go to court if you don't have to? Some people have to. Let them go to court. They can use all those resources. For everybody else, let's get you into therapy. Let's calm it down. Let's come up with a plan. It's very doable. It's not rocket science. You don't have to be a lawyer to be a mediator. You don't have to be a social worker. I mean, you just have to care about these kids and families and being willing to learn the tools of communication to help these parents. And I think if we had more mediators, that would be a wonderful, wonderful thing. I think our families need it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And with that, if anyone is ever interested in learning more about mediation, I know a lot of the mediation centers on the different islands provide training on different, in person, online. And there's opportunities to then volunteer or practice both in person and online nowadays too. So yeah, so Thank you, Katie, for your time, for your leadership, your kindness today. Thanks as well to everyone who joined us today.